People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off.
My dad always kind of filled me in on certain things that happened to us in our past, but I never realized how bad it was. It's just kind of a realization moment that not everybody is taught that, because it's not their history, and it is their history. Native Americans were sent to boarding schools to die. If you didn't die physically, you would come out of the school broken. My great-grandfather, Frank Quinn, he ran away from this boarding school 3 times. He was 8 years old, and it's like, how? How could an 8-year-old cross over mountains 50 miles a couple of days? It's just unthinkable. Some of us start this race in life way farther ahead than other people when they're born. But at the end of the day, it's up to us to really make that kind of comeback.
Khoury was a fun little kid. He liked to run. There was a kid's half mile. He sprinted it. He was just fast.
Now, they always told me your legs are going to take you places. I just wish it could have happened sooner, because I knew I had the skill. But we just didn't have the resources.
College recruiters don't think about looking on the res for their next runner.
It's not just trying to get to college. It's just not that simple. It's a lot deeper than that. I'm trying to run away to better things.
It's easy to internalize trauma and let it define who you are. Don't let yourself feel sorry for yourself, ever.
The truth never has to hurt. The truth can empower.
You know, this is not a protest, it's a remembrance. It's something that we're acknowledging in the past that is finally coming to light. I haven't accomplished what I want to accomplish, but I'm getting there.
Kutubin Stevens.
Hey, I'm better than you! I'm gonna run with everything I got.
Roll with this pack!
And remember why I'm here. Because of all the different Native Americans who gave their lives down the line, just to be whittled down through different bloodlines to me.
Hey folks, welcome to a special episode of The Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. On this episode, I am talking with Paige Bethmann and Stephanie Khoury. Paige is the director and Stephanie is the editor of the 2025 film called Remaining Native. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the interview. Paige, I think I'll start with you. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got involved in filmmaking?
My grandmother was a traditional Mohawk storyteller, and growing up, I would hear her tell a lot of stories about where maple syrup was made and who Sky Woman was, and she just had such a gift of being able to share stories from the heart and with so much detail and excitement. And so I was really drawn to storytelling. And throughout being a teenager, I would just always gravitate towards videos, whether that was to get out of making a essay at school and offer a video project instead, or just putting my stuffed animals around my house and pretending to be Steve Irwin. I just always loved storytelling. And I ended up going to college where I met Steph at Ithaca College and studied TV and film there, and moved to New York City and pursued the big dream and the Big Apple. But yeah, I think I really got into more nonfiction storytelling through Vox. I worked on a current affairs show. I was doing a lot of work in short form and long form documentary. And then when this project came about is when I first started doing independent filmmaking.
How often have you guys worked together?
We've done it kind of quite a bit. I think a couple, like 2 or 3 times throughout after college. I think Steph worked for Vox for a while on 2 different shows and then some other side projects. So we worked together with each other over the years.
And Stephanie, what brought you to editing? What attracted you about that?
I always liked, I think I fell into like film accidentally. Like in high school, I had an advanced art class that I signed up for, and it got canceled because there was only 2 students signed up, and just me and some other person. And the only thing that filled my schedule was video production that wouldn't mess anything else up. So I got placed in there. And then I just started falling in love with editing in that process. And I would edit like highlight reels for sports teams. And then that's the first time it really occurred to me that people do this. And I went to look for editing programs specifically, but I couldn't find any in college. There was like no degree for editing. But at Ithaca, they had a degree for documentary film. And I was like, that works, because I basically figured, I was like, I can't make a fiction film if my life depended on it. But real life was always like so interesting. And I always had this natural curiosity that I was like, I can make films or work on films about any subject matter and continue to learn. And then when I was at Ithaca, I always gravitated to the editing process, because even when I was filming, especially part of our program, you have to do every stage of the process. So that way you understand what it is to make a doc, especially because the crews are typically so small. But every time I would always gravitate toward the editing process, and I would think about like, how is this going to be put together in the end? And one of my professors, Tom Nicholson, was like, that's a mindset of an editor.
What's that relationship like, and how do you 2 work together?
When I first wanted to make this film, I immediately thought of Steph. She was one of the first people I told, just as a friend, but also someone who I've worked with in the past and who I admired her work. And to be able to then 2.5 years later to be looking for an editor in the process of it, I felt like trust was like a major component. So someone who understood, what I was going for with the story, someone who cared about the story, who saw the potential in the story. And I think 90% of making the film is based on conversations. And I think we took a lot of time to have a lot of conversations, to figure out different ways to approach the story, whether that's through crazy whiteboard, online, Miro. We were in Miro with like different shapes and styles, trying to articulate an emotional arc, a character arc, all of these different things. But really, it goes down to the footage. And Steph took a lot of time watching the footage and marking the footage and being able to tell me, this is what's here, and trusting in that process. And I think, yeah, there's a level of just like curiosity that Steph brings too, of I have this idea, but what if it was approached this way? Or let's try this out. Or let me show you 2 or 3 versions of the same scene in different approaches, and just being able to have an experimental mindset to be able to break the scenes that ended up making it in the film. So yeah, it's a long process, but I definitely think being able to have like open conversations and taking space too was definitely what was able to foster such a good team environment. But Steph, please weigh in as well.
I think it's really important to understand that the director, like they're there from the inception, and they've been working on it for so long that there's such a dedication. Typically in the projects that I've worked on, they've been working on it for so long, and there's obviously some passion that they feel so strongly about it. And I think as an editor, when you come in, it's really, you get excited by their passion for the story, for the project, and especially by their approach and what they want to pursue. And that becomes, like Paige said, the guiding kind of conversations that go into it. And then as an editor, it's also understanding that you're going in there, you're seeing the media, and you're working with them to problem solve some of the approaches or how we can go about it. And I think that there are also some steps too, like outside of the edit, watching references or coming in, reading other materials, reading other books, doing the research too outside of the film that was a part of the process. And I think something that was really great with working with Paige is just the openness of being able to be so vulnerable and sharing along with the process. Like, this history is, especially for this film, the history is heavy. And Paige has her own ties to the story, and she has her own experiences and her own family history that brings it in. And her vulnerability is both inspiring, but also so powerful to be able to have that as an editor, to have those conversations with. One thing with working with Paige that was really exciting is being able to like have those conversations, but the way she added to it too, and that collaboration of how they like evolved over time, which is really nice to see and also be a part of seeing the thought process come in.
Paige mentioned the mural boards that you guys were working on. I'm curious, when it comes to the edit itself, what are you logging this footage in? What are you actually cutting on now?
Cutting on Premiere and logging the footage kind of looks like a marker system. So basically, like, we use markers in terms of specific sound bites or even like specific shots or moments. Or sometimes we'd even have markers that were like, this is a really cool, like wacky kind of like lens flare or kind of crazy camera footage shake, but it might be useful at some other point. So it's like finding those little gems. And that's what our marker system looked like. And then also taking notes after the fact of sitting with the scene, sitting with the material and being like, what is this scene communicating? And how's it relating to the larger story? And so we'd have plenty of those conversations. So even when we had our note cards, we're like, what's the best way we can represent? Like, we know we have these sort of themes that are coming through, and what are the best representations that we have of those themes? And those note cards, we would move around on Miro. Sometimes when we were a person, we would move Post-it notes because it'd just be faster. And then we'd have a layer too of just scripts that we would, I would say script, but it was just like a transcript of the cut that would really help us get a sense of everything that was there and be able to see those beats, kind of like read it through.
Because they're dealing with a story that is multi-layered, and it's the whole process was figuring out how to interweave the storylines of past and present and future for what Khou's ambitions were as a runner. We had to make our edit reflect that. So our organization of the edit was breaking down all the footage that has to deal with Khou as a teenager, his present day life, going to school, hanging out with his family, the time spent on the res, and then the other storylines of his running journey. So all of the footage of him running for cross country and track, and then the Stewart side of the project, which is all the boarding school archival, and then the remembrance run. So there was a lot of different project breakdowns, and they were all assigned different colors. And then when we're looking at the Miro board and looking at it, we're seeing like when those things are coming up, where are they actually intersecting, and how we're able to keep the pace of the film going without being in one section for too long.
When it comes to the subjects of your films, how do they usually come to you?
This is my first feature film, and I think the other work that I have done, I think it just reflects my personal experiences. Was able to direct an episode for PBS called Native America, which followed Indigenous women in different sections of government, fashion, environmental preservation, and even comedy and music. And my experience being someone who's Indigenous, being a filmmaker, is just reflected in how I approach it. I think this story in particular came about because of the news that broke in 2021 about the Kamloops boarding school where remains of Indigenous children were found in unmarked graves. And for me, it was those stories that I heard growing up of my great-grandmother going to a boarding school, the reactions of community members sharing more of these stories, and then people sharing that they had no idea about this history. And I think that's what frustrated me the most, was the absence of people understanding and knowing that this happened. And then to see a story come out about a teenager who was run 50 miles across the desert to honor his great-grandfather being 17, I thought, wow, what a amazing way into this history with a modern young person, a story that can really be like an anchor to be able to share this history without necessarily turning it into an explainer or like a hand-holding experience of walking through our indigenous, or not even indigenous history, because it's all history, right? Not starting from 1642.
What was his reaction when you approached him and, hey, do you want to be the subject of this doc?
He's just a funny person. I think his parents have been so supportive. They're so loving. Anything that he does, they clap for him, or everything's amazing that he does. So I think when we were I approached his mom first to ask if I could come out to do the remembrance run and film it. And then getting to know Khou, it's almost like he's been preparing for this moment his whole life. I think there was a lot of trust building. I moved from New York City to Reno. I've been here for 3.5 years now, working on this film and being a part of the community, whether that's fishing with his family and a lot of time spent without the camera when we were making the film, but really developing a relationship with him as a teenager. He's not going to tell me what he's doing. He's going to show up at my house and eat the food out of my fridge and take a nap and move on with his day. And so I think by being able to build that relationship really reflected in what we were able to shoot, because we were family at that point. And I just wanted to add one other thing as well, which was Steph came out to do the remembrance run. Steph and our composer, Kino Benali, they both came and participated in 2023, ran and walked, miles, and was able to meet Khou and his family, was able to really understand place and get to know the landscape here. And I think that brought a really cool perspective into the edit by being able to be there and to bring back the ethos of the run, having experienced it. So that was really exciting.
Yeah, let's see Michael Kahn try to run a marathon, right? What kind of challenges was it to have a subject who is running? I think of so many documentaries as quote unquote talking heads. He's out running through so much of this footage. How is that to shoot all of that?
Shooting it was really challenging, and even editing it, I'm sure Steph can share about editing the footage, because you have a cinematographer chasing after a subject, his breathing, his footsteps go along with trying to capture Khou as a runner. But I think our cinematographer, Chai, he was a runner, and it takes a runner to film a runner. And I think by being able to have him be up close, to not be afraid to use the shaky camera shots to feel the actual visceral motion of running was really important, because when you watch Khou run from a distance, he just looks so effortless. And so it looks like he's not even working very hard. So to communicate that he's training and working really, really hard towards his dream, it was really hard to figure out how to shoot that and shoot how much effort it does take. And so we shot a couple of different ways. We shot an electric skateboard. Shai, our cinematographer around the track, was on an electric skateboard, being able to control it and get really close up and shoot shadows and shoot Khou, his feet, and to be able to be in the motion. We also shot on tripods on a 100 to 400 lens, in the middle of the track, to be able to track him going around and around. So when you saw in the montage in the film, we're able to match cut a lot of different angles of the track to get that experience of that repetition that has to go into it. And then a lot of it was just chasing him in the desert, hoping that we get the shot. We use obviously the drone to track him, but yeah, it was challenging. And I think the sound design was most important. So I think working with Khou, we had him on, I brought him on my Peloton at home to record isolated breath at different paces. So that way we can get his breath by itself in a container. So that way you'd be able to use it to make it more of a muscle memory effect throughout the film. And then working with our sound designer, Tom Paul, who really went in and Foleyed a lot of the footsteps and the brush and really making the whole experience be super immersive.
We had 3 runs to pull from of material. There was the first run that Paige went to, and then the second run, which is the bulk of the end of the film that you'll see. And then in terms of his races, it was such a gift to have all those races because it really added to just like that pursuit of training, that journey for Khou. And I think it's the same thing with the remembrance runs. To be able to articulate the journey, you need that amount of content. And even though it may look repetitive at times, that reinforces like the feel of the journey that Khou is taking in terms of approaching his dreams. And I joke because like when I was looking at the footage the first time, I'm also like a former distance runner and I used to run the similar races to Khou. And I was like, he's so fast that if you don't, depending on how you cut this, he's either in dead last because you can't tell how fast he is in some of these things without the context, or he's in, obviously, the answer is he's in first. But it was just really funny because no one's near him. Like for most of his races, like he goes to the start and he is basically out so far ahead in terms of just blowing a lot of his competition out of the water. We really had to find those moments where he might have been lapping somebody. So you have that comparison to be like, wow, this kid is really fast, or saying the times. So you have that reference so you can keep up to that. Like those little details became really important to put the context of how talented this kid is.
Paige, when was the first time that you got to sit down and watch this with an audience?
Throughout the process, we did a couple of work in progress screenings. Steph and I participated in the Sundance Edit Lab when it was like assembly, and that was terrifying to show anybody. Assembly type of cut. I think the first real audience was South by Southwest to have the actual finished product there. There was a 200-person theater and it was almost filled. And so it was really nerve-wracking to see it in that way. But previously, I had shown the film to Khou and his family. I actually went up to Oregon a couple of cuts earlier to show the film just to Khou because this is his story. I wanted to make sure that he felt like it was representative of him and that he felt good about the film and where it was going. At South by, it was just tremendous, like the reception and the people who came out to the screening. We did a lot of outreach to the community. We wanted to make sure that Indigenous communities in Austin knew we were going to be there. We wanted to bring them in, invite them in. We wanted to connect with the running community in Austin. And so to have the runners in the audience who are laughing at some of the running humor in the movie or reacting to the times or the splits that Khou is running, and then to have Indigenous folks afterwards come up to me and start sharing their own family stories and connections. It was really powerful. And I was sitting next to Khou the whole time during the screening, and we were just both really, really emotional.
What does he think about being a movie star now?
He's been ready for it. He's trying to expense his clothing to our production. But he's always wanted to have a platform to share about his own family and his community. Even before we were filming with him, he was getting recognized for his talent and ability as a runner. And every interview that he did, he made sure to talk about his people and their needs and wanting to advocate and bring awareness. So I think he's in this position now where he has a platform with the film, but also the film is his own way of advocating for his people through his story. So I think he likes it. I think there was times when, he was looking back and he's like, oh, I'm so embarrassing, which I don't know how you can even feel that way about to watching the film. But there were things that didn't make it in the film that he's, okay, don't film my prom, or this, I messed up chopping this wood. Well, they didn't want us to show, but I think overall, we have a good relationship and he's excited for the opportunities to come.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the workshop when showing that assembly cut and how you guys worked together to fine tune everything in that editing process?
With the edit lab, you basically arrive with a rough cut or your assembly at where you're at for the full film. And then you show that and you spend the week working on a section of that film. And so for us, we really dove into figuring out the themes. We basically re-edited the beginning of the film. And then that's where we came up with the imagine sequences and leaning into that whole idea in that week of the edit lab. So it was really great for us to be a part of that. And then also take the time to talk largely about some of those things that we were honing into, because at that point we had started to carve things together, and then we continued to carve that post lab into things, Paige had mentioned the interweaving of the story. A breakthrough in terms of our process with editing, I think, is when we did actually focus in on the storylines. And so we looked at the individual storylines, which was Khou's running journey. And then there's another Khou's personal life. And then it would be Togo's story. And seeing those storylines individually helped us hone in on what the repetitions were, what wasn't hitting, where the emotional beats that we really needed to land, and then also draw connections in the moments where we could find those interweavings. It also highlighted to us too the way that the imagines, when you go into those archival sequences, they really immerse you into a specific kind of space in the film. And we had to keep certain things in I would say chunks, for lack of a better word, but informational pieces, so that way you weren't getting lost when you came out of the other side of the story.
Paige, what's next for the film? Where's it going to show at, and where can people keep up with the movie and the screenings?
www.remainingNativeDocumentary.com. We have been listing the next festivals and screenings as they come in and as they are allowed to be publicly announced. And so right now, our next festival is going to be at the Salem Film Festival in Massachusetts. And then we are going to be at the River Run Festival in North Carolina. We're doing 2 community screenings here in Nevada in April. And so that's about all I can say right now. But we'll definitely be populating our webpage as more dates come in for the festival screenings. And we're still seeking distribution. And we're hoping that the film will get an opportunity to reach a really wide audience.
Paige and Stephanie, thank you so much for your time. It was great talking with you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.